All right, so I think we are live. There we go. Thank you to our. Where is Sydney? I don't know. Hopefully
I
they'll
don't
join
know.
us soon.
I'm about to text him now.
There you go. And is the sound coming through okay, Hinda, from my end?
Yep, yep.
Okay.
Good morning.
Because like I see that the internet connection is perfect, so
Good.
just wanted to
Is this
make
considered a
sure.
date? What do you think? Good date. I have very low bar for dates. Sometimes the church and I are on the way to a typical, I'd say, is this considered a date? That's okay. Drive here together? What, drive together? Right. I think it's a date.
That's the date. There you go. Okay.
Weird.
Okay, I think we should dedicate today's the yard site of Dr. Sepowitz, right? Third yard site. And this will dedicate our learning to his memory this morning. Okay, so last we left off, we were in the middle of I was sort of setting the table for SIF tests. Now, if you don't, well, actually, anybody who doesn't have an Aruch HaShulchan, which I assume is everyone around the table except for me, should take one of these that you'll take and pass. I know Bruce has one already, and we'll get one over here to Dr. Noble also. And Hinda will, I'll just read and you'll listen to some of this, and then we'll go back to the Mishnah Berurah, and I'll translate everything as we go. Is there, did I not make enough copies?
Okay, it's okay. It's one page.
Yeah, just a one-sider. Oh, a few copies are coming. Okay, so okay, David, let's get one to David.
What is it you're handing out?
The Aruch HaShulchan. Just we're gonna read a couple of paragraphs. I figured, you know what, I have a chance to make a copy. So for those who are here in person, but don't worry, I will read it and translate everything. So last week we saw that there was a machlokas between the Rishonim about how to read two passages that arise in the Gemara in Pesachim, and as a result, so the Rif and the Rambam it came out on one side that you have to make kiddush on wine. Maybe bread can be a backup when we're talking about what you can use for kiddush. And there were many who were on this side as well. We talked about many of the Gaon, Rav Amram Gaon, Rav Tzemach Gaon, Rav Nissen Gaon. The Maharam Rutenberg was on this side of that argument. But we had on the other side, we had the Ri, who was one of the Balei Tostos, and we had the Rush as well. So we have different approaches. One saying you have to use wine, and one saying that no, you could also use Chamar Medina, though perhaps only when wine is not so easily available.
Friday night or Shabbos?
This would be across the board, even on Shabbos day, not just Friday night. Okay,
It's all right, we'll listen. Okay, we'll
Just
share.
pronounce clearly.
Okay. There's an extra sheet over there. There's an extra.
Thank you.
They could send it down to you can send it down to BJ.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and then for the Aruch HaShulchan, we ran out of copies, which is fine. You'll just share. That's fine. You'll share it. Good, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we were up to in the Aruch HaShulchan, we were up to Yud Gimel. Okay, we're up to Yud Gimel. Yeah, correct. Okay, so he had pointed out that in the Shulchan Aruch, he said that we follow the Rush. The Rush who says that at night we only make kiddush, on bread if we don't have wine available. This is again only if wine is not available. You can't find any wine, and then during the day you can make kiddush on sheikhar, but again only in a situation where you can't find wine. Right? And by the way, even adds in v'divrei tamim. This makes a lot of sense. And the Ramah adds in that the minhag in the Ashkenazi lands were in accordance with the words of the Rush. And so let's take a look now at Yud Gimel in the Aruch HaShulchan, okay, where he takes this little, or he starts to speak about his own situation. or the Jews in his time, their situation. He says, that which it says, which is what the Brahma wrote, which is that if there's wine in the city, you shouldn't make kiddush on bread. Devadai yayin mitzvah min amufchar gam balayla gam bayom. He said to use wine is the choicest way to do the mitzvah at night and during the day, so you shouldn't use bread. Again, unless you have no wine on Friday night, then you use the bread in the place of the wine. Now, he says, Mihu, Gam Gedolei Hador, Nohagu B'Shacharis Levarech Ashechar. That nevertheless, there were many great, leaders of the generation who have been, whose practice is that in the morning they make Kiddush on Shechar. Beer.
Which generation?
I assume he's talking about his own, or maybe even a few before. Although you see here, by the way, he does quote here. There are a few others who have cited this man, like the Bach. The Bach was the father-in-law of the Taz, if I'm not mistaken. Or I hope I didn't get that mixed up in terms of which one was the father-in-law. But I think I got that correct. The Magen Avram cites this minhag. The Maharshal cites this minhag. Rav Shachna. Even says that they had wine. They were making kiddush on alcohol, on beer. And he says that many mefarshim have struggled to explain the reason behind this. Yesh Misha Kasav. One gives the Bach gives an explanation. Shiratzu liftor hamashkin shebesocha seuda. Well, we wanted to have beer because that way when we make the shahakol, it is a patur for all the other beverages that we have with this meal.
But the Geffen does that also.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that. Okay, yeah, exactly. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's interesting reasons. Right.
About Geffen covering.
Right. So exactly. So therefore, for those who don't, this helps them. And v'yesh misha kasav mipnei shehayayin beyoker. The Taz writes, well, the wine is so expensive, so it's cost prohibitive to always be consuming wine. Therefore, we're using the alcohol. V'yesh misha kasav, and the Magen Avram give a reason. Mishum de medina seinu have shechar chamar medina. People drink beer here like it's wine, like it's water, right? And therefore this is the common beverage. Nobody drinks wine around here. The common beverage that's consumed around here is beer. Now, where did the Magen Avram live? Anyone know?
Where did he live?
Where did he live? He lived, I think, in the 1700s, if I'm not mistaken. But where did he live? He lived in, if I'm not mistaken, I'm gonna have to misquote myself. But the Magen Avram, I thought he lives in Poland. Yeah, which is going to be an important here of Avram Gambiner. Right, he was a Polish, Gombin, right, exactly. He was from Poland, right, and he was a leader in Kalisz during around 17th century. Okay, so I forgot that. Okay, but he's in Poland.
That's actually earlier than I thought.
Yeah, I was thinking 1700s. It was 17th century. So anyway, so the Magen Avram, again, remember Poland. Just remember that for a moment because it's going to come up in a discussion about how well grapes grow in cold countries like Poland. So just remember, because he says that beer is like shechar, is like chamar medina. People drink it here as if it were the wine that's described in the times of the Talmud. So. Oh, ulai haya hashechar chaviv aleim. Finally, somebody says the truth. Yeah, or maybe they just like beer. Right? I'm just kidding. I don't want to. Just joking, tongue in cheek. Demitamze gam hayom harbe bismanenu. Now he's talking about his own time. The Aruch HaShulchan describing end of the 1900s, beginning of the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. Exactly, he was around the turn of the century, and he says even in our time, people bismanenu shemikachin b'shachris al yain sraf. People are using whiskey to make kiddush in the morning, mishum de lerov ha'olam, because most people
You go to Kiddush and you take a poll. He says, Rov ha'olam chaviv hayin sraf kodem ha'achila v'etzlein hu chamar medina. People like a little whiskey before the meal. And for them, that's the chamar medina. They're not drinking wine so much, they're drinking whiskey. The Yeshikosvu, and there are those who try to explain and write, Shelo lekadesh al yain sraf ela im kein b'medinos sherov shtiyasan hahamon hu yain sraf b'chol yom. You know, the Magen Avraham, when he writes, if you're going to use whiskey, that only makes sense in a country, in a place where people are drinking whiskey most days of the week. No comments. Everyone's quiet around the table.
He's talking about spot.
Right.
Kentucky.
That's right. And here's the biggest problem I always find with the Kiddush over schnapps. He doesn't bend on one of the key issues that you really need to have to make this a cleaner halachic argument, which is that you need to be able to drink a below lukmav of whiskey. That is not, the little shot glasses. Even if you in one, that's not a malol lugmav. A malol lugmav means that it's really literally a malol lugmav is that's like a mouthful, right? But what we say is that you're able to push it to one side, of your mouth, and that's the size of a malol lugmav. Those shot glasses are not a malol lugmav. Maybe I don't know. I've never done the experiment. I have no plans to try. But what is a malol lugmav? Bigger, that's so Steve says as a shul, they're going to put out bigger shot glasses from now on because of Rabbi Klinger's chumras.
When you talk about this at Pesach and you're having, and you have that issue with the wine when you're drinking it, right? That you at least have to fill your mouth, right? The same thing on
Minimally,
right?
yes.
No, it's a minimal thing. And so you're not starting with, what do you have? 2 3/4 and 4 different measures that you might have of that. So I'm thinking that shot glasses are probably correct.
I believe the shot glasses are one.
Get that one shot.
Well, look what we're talking.
I'm serious.
But those are usually 1 ounce. So those little plastic ones, they're a single ounce.
There are some that are an ounce and a half.
Okay, some are ounce and a half. Like we talked about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Hinda. Yeah.
Do you have to drink all of that at once, that malol lugmav, or can it be the glass and you
I
sip
think
it?
it could be over a reasonable amount of time that would take a person to sort of to drink revius. Like it's like like what we say by eating a kazayas. It's bevas achas. I think doesn't here mean in one. I think I know usually it does. Usually means bevas achas means in one moment. Here I think he means not in 2 separate sort of halachic drinkings within the that'd be very surprising because even when it comes to wine. There's no obligation to drink the whole lugmav in one fell swoop. So that I think he means bavasach means in one halachic, one halachic zman. Yeah. You just have to have the right amount of scotch. I think, and
So they should not have it right one shot.
but we've said, but if we said that a revius, because we've mentioned this, a revius. I forgot what Rav Rimon said. I had that sefer I had taken a picture of a number of weeks ago. Rav Rimon had said like a revius is something in the neighborhood of almost 3 ounces. So if you're talking about a rov revius, which is what the approximation of a malol lugmav, you're somewhere in the 1.5 plus. I don't remember the exact number, and I can go back and dig it up again.
I thought there was a measure just under, but we also have one where it's 4, so that could be a shot glass or something.
Right.
I don't think it means that it has to be more than half of a repeat. I think that you have to fill your mouth.
That's probably the more precise measurement. The Gemara, the halachic poskim, they use rov revius because revius is what you have to use when you make kiddush, and then you have to drink a majority of that, which is approximated to be the malol lugmav, the full cheek size. Yes. Yeah, Tommy, go ahead.
You try to get something that's special.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're saying food wise or drink wise?
everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so when, I don't know about everybody, but some people, when it comes to drinking, like a shot of whiskey or anything like that, it's something special. So they're doing it for Shabbos because they sort of.
It enhances the
It
Shabbos.
enhances the
It's not,
Shabbos. It's something special. Look, I don't do this every day, but on Shabbos, I wanted to have some for Kiddush, so, to enhance it.
Right.
So why doesn't
But he
that
said
get
the
into-
opposite, right? It should be something that you do daily, right? Or at least one of the.
because it has to be Chamar Medina. Well, yeah, you're saying that instead of so forgive my amaratzus when it comes to knowing about whiskey, but let's say it's the $50 bottle of whiskey during the week that you sometimes take a little bit on Shabbos. On Shabbos, I'm going for the black label, right? I'm going for the most expensive. Yeah, I know a little bit about it. Hatov Hameter, exactly. So I hear, right? You're trying. I do get that there is something that maybe people use it as a special, like, I don't do this during the rest of the week, but on Shabbos I want to, just like the Gemara talks about in Masechah Shabbos, the way I dress during the week shouldn't look like how I dressed on Shabbos, and the way I walk during the week shouldn't look like the way I walk on Shabbos. I walk more benachas on Shabbos, etc. So the things that I drink, right, on Shabbos are not like that I drink during the week. Though here's the trick: is that it has to be called Chamar Medina, which means that it's commonly consumed. Again, the word chamra means wine, and this particular place, this is the way, like, they consume, like the way wine used to be consumed in Bisman HaGemara, where wine was something that was consumed quite frequently because they didn't have running water the way we have. Right, correct, and
That's why you had beer.
Right.
It's unsafe.
correct. So, anyways, these are some of the different reasons given. So people are doing this for generations. So we're, going back already to the 1600s, when people are certainly, making kiddush over something that is not wine, whether it was beer or whether it was whiskey. And he says here, ending this paragraph, he says people do drink a lot of whiskey around here because it's not so strong. And it's considered Chamar Medina. People are consuming it. Jews, non-Jews, everywhere. This is what people commonly drink in this area. Now, with all that being said, describing different reasons that would justify this minhag, Yudalad in the Aruch HaShulchan, he says, "Omnam kol ha'te'amim ein miskalim al halev." Aruch HaShulchan says, nothing. All these reasons, I can't accept them in my heart. He says wine is better, and I think here he's saying a halachic statement, not a statement here about what he likes in terms of taste. But he says wine is better. At the end of the day, wine is better. If there's wine in their house or wine in the city they could buy at the store, why are they buying the whiskey only at the expense of buying the wine? Right? We should be making kiddush on wine. That's what the Gemara talks about. This is, this is what even the Shulchan Aruch, the most simple reading, says the only time that you can do other things for kiddush is b'makom she'ein yain matzui, when there's no wine found. But when there is, that should be our responsibility. And we do that all the time when it comes to halacha. We buy things that we might otherwise not buy. We all the time. By the way, we're all about to do that right now. We're all about to purchase a lot of things on Pesach that we would, think about the price you're going to pay for shmura matzah. You could buy 10 bottles of wine for one piece of shmura matzah, right? It's unbelievable. So he says here, "Ule'anius dati nirabor tam acher." He says, by the way, he says, but people are doing it here, so I'm going to give you the real reason we do it. Why are we not making kiddush on wine? He says, "Dehine atur kasav de masai mikru share mashkim chamar medina." When do we call, especially if you read the Gemara like we talked about last week? There was a Gemara that said, "Oh yeah, you can go ahead and make, it was a Havdalah or something like that. I forget now the context of the Gemara." All right, the Gemara in Psachim, the Rosh writes in his commentary, right? And the way to explain the Gemara we talked about last week was that it's called Chamar Medina when there is Keshe'en Yain Gadel Sevivos Ha'ir Mehalech Yom, Mehalech Yom. If you can't find wine within one day's a journey, then the other drink becomes called Chamar Medina. That's the most harsh way to read the Gemara. That when there is no wine, the other drink becomes Chamar Medina, whatever that drink happens to be. And so he says here, V'hamordechai kasav. When is it called Chamar Medina? Keshelaku hakramim, when the vineyards are struck by whatever issue came up, and so they didn't have proper growth. V'hinei kol kadmonenu v'chein hagaonim hakadmonim. All of those who came before us, so he means those great poskim, and also the great gaonim, hayu beBavel, that were in Bavel, u'v'sfarad, who were living in the Sephardic lands, in Spain and others. U'v'tzarfat, in France, the Ashkenaz here means Germany. Sham yesh yenos harbet. They had plenty of wine. The bechol medinos elu gedelim anovim ad lemarbeh. The grapes are growing, en masse there. Like they're not worried, right, about making wine in those countries. But he says, where we live? It's winter in May, right? Aval Medinos Hatzfonios, the northern countries, Kishalonu, like ours, Yadua She'ein Etzlenu Yain Klal. No wine is growing around here. We don't have grapes, at least not plentiful. The Hamuvayim Medinos Acheres, but you'll say, well, but Rabbi Epstein, there are in the store. Go to the store. There are. Come on, I don't buy that there aren't wine stores. Someone has made a business of selling wine in your area. Yes, but you know what? When supply and demand, when the supply is low, right, and the demand is high, the prices are high. It's cost prohibitive in our region when wine is not native to our country. Wine is very expensive, right? And the tariffs. Become harbe yirei Elokim, she'enam rotzem lishtosam ibnei hechsher ki yadua, and it's not like today. Today, everything is black and white. It's a kosher wine. That wine is not a kosher wine. There is no in between. Wine that comes from somewhere else, there was no teuda on the bottle. So do you know that maybe it wasn't the problem of stam yenam, that it was handled at some point by a non-Jew, and so there are yirei Elokim who didn't want to get involved in the shaila. Is this really mutter or not? Even with the expensive wine that was coming from some other country. The Einet Slenu Rak Yain, by the way, this fits exactly with what Steve was saying, that turn of the century recipe that he pointed out a few weeks ago. What's the only kind of wine we have around here, he says? Einet Slenu Rak Yain Mitzimukin. Yeah, raisin wine. And look what he says about raisin wine. He says, V'hayayin hazeh bedochach levarech bar gafen. It's a very halachic question whether you can make bar gafen, which you do. Raisin wine is a bar gafen. Kemosha tarachnu basel le'el b'sivin reish beis, b'sivin reish dal, v'le'el b'siv zayin. V'lachein hagdolim shayu b'dinaseinu. The gedolim in our country says, Hirchiku es atzon yayin zeh. They distance themselves from this kind of wine. But dilahem b'kiddush shalayla. They just do kiddush at night on this. Because there you have to make kiddush on wine. Then if the backup is chalas, okay, we'll use yain simukim. But look what he says. He says with the MS. Now I think this is a statement about taste. He says, and also, I'm putting it out there, it's a burden to drink that stuff. The raisin wine is kaved, it's a masa kaved, it's a heavy burden, tichbar aleinu, that is placed upon us to drink raisin wine. Right? Hayayin simukin shalanu. He says the raisin wine isn't good. It's not, we don't enjoy it. We're making faces as we drink it. Okay, look, on Friday night we have no choice to make kiddush on it. So what are we going to do? Remember we talked about last time when we talked about yain simukim, has to be 1/6 of the whole, and is the whole, how do I make the recipe correct so that it is indeed a borei priya gafen as the whole? I have to make it maybe 1/6 of the recipe, that there has to be 1/6 of the raisins inside the pot when I'm actually cooking it, which are a lot of raisins. And so what we see from all of this is that the reason that for Shacharis in the morning, people are making Kiddush on whiskey or whatever other beverage is because they only have raisin wine available. And the raisin wine is really something that they don't enjoy. And to your point, Tommy, right? It's Shabbos, and you want to be able to enjoy what you're consuming. Look, okay, you can pull out a wine that's not your favorite wine, but it's a wine that tastes good. If they're really making faces as they consume the raisin wine, so bedochak we drink it on Friday night because we feel halachically we have to do it, but otherwise we don't enjoy it. So that's why people of the minhag in all the northern countries in Poland and we're in Russia we're not drinking wine, we're drinking whiskey, we're drinking some other type of schnapps. And he says, continuing on here, he goes a little further with the Chamar Medina, and we're going to see the Mishnah Berurah is going to disagree with the next point. Okay, when we get to the Mishnah Berurah in a moment. He says, "V'yoser mizeh ra'inu l'gedolim she'asu havdalah." He says, more than this, by the way, I have seen gedolim testifying. He says, I've seen gedolim who have made havdalah on milk, al chalav, on milk, right? O al tei matok, sweet tea. Afal gav devalei lo shayach likros chamar medina. How in the world could you call this milk or sweet tea chamar medina? He says, but I've seen gedolim. He says. Right? Gedolim who have made havdalah on sweet tea or milk. And we wouldn't call it chamar medina. Ach, mipnei halachatz. Zohadchak. By the way, what's he playing off here? Very good. That is the Seder. That is the Medrash on the Pasuk. Halachatz. Zohadchak. Okay? By the way, good. Very good. Steve is ready for the Seder. Right? From the Pesukah and then the Medrash on it. So, very good. That when I was reading, I was he's playing off the Haggadah here. He says, because of the pressure, which is the Dchak, which is the, that we don't want it, there's nothing available to drink. We don't have yayin. By the way, and sometimes, we don't have velo shechar. We don't have beer available. Or we're careful about the prohibition of chadash. What is he talking about here? Because of course, most of our alcoholic beverages are made from wheat or barley. Or you don't. If it's, I'll use a very simple example. Like right now, we're a few weeks before Pesach. All the drinks that are produced from wheat or barley in a society like probably where he was living, they weren't holding on to the grains for so long before they were being produced into something. And therefore, in March, before Pesach, all the drinks that are made out of beer, barley, or wheat are from the tvuach that is called chadash. Now, after the second day of Pesach, it's a new world, and all those who are makpid on chadash, they can go back to consuming all the things until a certain point later in the year. But at certain points of the year, you can't make, if you're makpid on chadash, in chutz la'aretz, some people are, then this also becomes a problem. Beer consumption becomes a problem for you at a certain point during the year. And so what do, right? I don't know about today, by the way. Yeah, so on the second day of Pesach, the Korban HaOmer was brought. And this would matir any barley that was produced before or had already started growing from before that date to be consumed without any prohibition. But the Torah says that new grains, let's say something started to grow only after Pesach, and it fully grows and is harvested in the end of summer, let's say, beginning of fall, and then you take that and you make beer out of that, or you make pasta, you make bread. You're not allowed, the Torah says you're not allowed to consume that. Now, there's a whole machlokas. It's a bit interesting halachic topic, but some say, well, but if it's in chutz la'aretz, we're not makpid on this, only in Eretz Yisrael. But it's not so clear that's the case. But the long-standing minhag in chutz la'aretz is to not be makpid on this. So this is why you don't hear maybe too much of this, but you might see on packages sometimes, or on bread, it'll say yashan, because yashan means the flour comes from the old batch, the pre-Pesach batch. Because in Israel, this is something you have to be very much more careful about, of course. But and I'm sure things are. They probably don't even. It's not even marked, by the way, yashan in Israel, right? Why? Because if it's not yashan, you can't eat it. anyways, so bottom line is this would be problematic. Anyone who's careful about yashan can't consume any grain, wheat, barley, let's say grain products, at a certain point in the year once things are being produced from post Pesach plantings. Okay, and then it resets every Pesach. You don't unless it's probably so. Again, if chutzlaretz they're not makbid, though some products are marked as yashan. Those who are careful about this, extra careful, will know. But my Rebbe happens to be careful about yashan. He could send you to the U.S. DA. No, it's not a DA. That's the agriculture one. USDA, is that the agriculture? That's the utility. Go to the USDA. You can see on the website when certain harvests when certain harvests happened. When was it planted? And based on that, you can know when certain things are hitting the market and when you have to stop buying, let's say, Barilla pasta, if you're market about these things. When is the average? So if you're careful about this, there are ways to know, generally speaking, the time of the year when you have to sort of cut yourself off from certain products. The start date? Oh, when do people start being? So he always said it's usually in the fall. That things that were planted after Pesach are harvested in the late summer. Then they start to be produced. So I believe it was like in the fall that you start to have to be careful again. Yeah. So sometimes it will say on the store. So I don't think in the local bagel shops they do this, but certain places, if you go to, I bet you if you go to some bakeries in Queens or the Five Towns or Brooklyn or Muncie, on the Te'udah it will say Yoshan. That's what they're talking about. That people who don't want to eat that new grain, they can eat in my store.
I don't hold from the fight.
What about when produce really in April, May?
It's not a problem because usually that was planted and started growing. It was already growing from beforehand.
Timing is when it was planted.
Yeah, when it was niklat. Yeah, correct. Yeah, yes, very good. Yeah, so.
Making that one up.
It actually makes. So again, it makes. Yeah, it makes life much more complicated.
Even in Israel, it's imported.
Oh, if it's imported, yeah. But again, if it's produced in chutzlaretz, it's already much more of a what's it called? Less stringency. Now, Val, let's continue here for a moment. V'hinei hakidushim osim balayla ala pas v'shachis al yain sraf. And so in these places where they have no wine or even beer, sometimes they're doing, what are they doing? Kiddush on bread at night, and shachris they're using whiskey, yain sraf. Aval havdalah shekasher l'shtos as yain sraf. And havdalah, when it's not so easy to, I've had a lot to drink on Shabbos, and it's not so easy to drink yain sraf behechrech. Lasos al eze mashke, v'chalav have mashke v'tei mato gam kein shosim harbe. And look, because people were drinking milk much more than I think even by the way today. Today milk is mass produced. I think that I don't know. I think that milk is not as I don't know. Whatever. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But milk was definitely very much consumed. They had the milkman every day showing up at your door with a.
I grew up, sweet tea was
Mashke, right? He's saying here, or yeah, exactly. So sweet tea. The MS Tisha Nigdakdek ain't etzleinu Chamar Medina klal when we don't have Chamar Medina available. Hey, everybody, there was no whiskey in the house. There's no whiskey right now. There's no batch. It's whatever. Couldn't afford it. Whatever it is. So Zula. We have nothing except for Yain Sraf. The Rov Balei Batavina said and Shotzim B'chol, and we don't drink that during the weekdays. Right? So the Yain Sraf, almost like what Tommy was saying, is like we hold that as a special drink, on Shabbos. V'lo yain v'lo sheicha lo chol sudam u'ma shayach likrosam chamar medina. So what shaychus does milk have as being called chamar medina? What shaychus does sweet tea have being called chamar medina? V'chein b'tocha gadol kazeh dai v'masharak sham mashke alzeh. Right, so then we rely on milk or on the tea. But he says, Zeu vaday de al yain tov, yoser tov mikol hamashkim. But wine is better than all of these things, halachically. Bein lekiddush, Bein lehavdala, ubein al kol shel bracha, whether the kiddush, havdalah, or any kol shel bracha, wine is preferred. And I would say that in our situation here, wine is cheaper. From when I go into the store, wine is cheaper than most whiskeys out there.
Right.
Or at least you can get wine. You can of course buy wine bottles that are of great expense
The cheaper than what did you say? I'm sorry.
than the whiskey. But I go to the store. I don't know. Again, it probably depends on the brand, on the level. But it's not that wine isn't available to us at a price that is less than any of these alcoholic beverages that we consume. So if we're consuming the alcoholic beverages because we like them, which is fine. I have no people always think I don't. It's not my taste. That's all. Wine I'll drink, but then why are we? Then why not take a bottle of wine also when we're at the store? Instead of buying 5 bottles of whiskey, you get 4 bottles and get the 1 bottle of wine, and we'll make sure to have that for Shabbos day. That would be the argument I think that the Aruch HaShulchan will make. And by the way, the Shulchan Aruch on a very simple level, b'makom she'ein yayin matzli. You can't say the yayin is not matzli if it was available at the store. I just didn't purchase it. That's not what I mean by yayin matzli. It even says by mahalech yom echad. Right? Is it not available anywhere around here? That's what the Aruch HaShulchan says. Wine is not available where we live. And when it is there, it's imported and it's at a high cost because the supply is low. And we're not living in such luxury, and the other drinks, the Yain Sraf, is much cheaper for us. So this is the discussion that is to be had about this. Again, has it been for generations that people have been making kiddush on whiskey? Yes. Or other beer, whatever? The answer is yes. So those who continue to do so, you have upon what to stand. I'm not here to criticize, and say that you're not following halacha. I'm really saying that seriously. But I just point out the simple read of this, and we're going to read the Mishnah Berurah now. We still have time. I'm going to read the Mishnah Berurah now. The Mishnah Berurah is also going to say things that are very similar. He's going to justify some minhag. He is going to say that milk and tea. Absolutely not. No. But the Aruch HaShulchan is saying, what are we supposed to do? We don't even have beer. He's talking in very practical terms. Like, what do you want me to do? I'm throwing my hands up here and saying, I have nothing else to drink. So, yeah, Jeffrey. If you say that grape juice counts, then there should be no difference. But you should try, even when you have wine available, to always use the best wine when you do kiddush. I would argue that grape juice isn't the best wine out there. You might have another bottle, in which case that's probably the one you should use for kiddush, because when we do a mitzvah, we want to use the best. But sometimes situations are such. I often am making kiddush on grape juice. My children are there. I want them to be able to have some of the little bit from the kiddush cup. But if you're going to hold the grape juice as wine, then it's a chol davar, and then it counts. And by the way, that would mean, if you like grape juice more than wine, if somebody had a preference for grape juice more than wine to taste, then they should maybe that's their consumption, But some people don't love because it gets boiled, and therefore. But we talked about that some weeks ago that pasteurization shouldn't affect grape juice. He was asking about grape juice versus sort of what we call real wine. Yeah. Well, that one already fermented though, and then they pasteurize it, which we talked about, that just pasteurization, we learned last week, the quick pasteurization doesn't get up to mevushal, according to most poskim. Mevushal is something different, right? Where it has to get to a certain temperature for a little bit more of a time. Steve, yeah, you want to say something? Yes.
Other beverages like vodka.
Yes.
What you understand is the vodka was very low.
Oh yes, they drank that every day. so the stories go. I can't vouch personally, but yes. I think it would have. I think that sort of is in the category of Yain Sraf, where it's this alcoholic beverage. it's clearly Chamar Medina. To me, that's the way it's been described. So we're on a very simple, like, were people making Kiddush on it? The answer is yes. People were making. I even think my father-in-law was telling me a story. His father was from my wife's grandfather was from Sens, before the war. Ended up in France after the war. And he said every Shabbos he had this same tradition with the same guys. They would go to shul. After shul, there was some restaurant, a kosher restaurant that was open afterwards, for lunch. And he would always go, and they had a cholent and kugel, and he would always finish a bottle of of vodka with all of his buddies. They would make
a lot of,
that they're using vodka.
they're using vodka for Kiddush.
For Kiddush, yeah. I think that vodka is probably in the same category as the whiskey. And I actually want to say that, Yain Sraf usually is typically translated as whiskey, but literally when you translate Yain Sraf, it means burnt wine. I think vodka counts. Yeah. If you're looking for the burning sensation,
Rob,
whiskey and gets it done, and vodka too. Yes, Simi, go ahead.
Rob, did I understand you correctly that according to Orech HaShulchan, the alternative to wine as Chamar Medina is acceptable on Friday night?
No, dafka not. Even Aruch HaShulchan said we grinned and bared that raisin wine on Friday night. We didn't like it, and halachically it's got some questions, but we made it work. But only Shabbos day. Shabbos day is when you can use sheikhar. Otherwise, if you don't have wine on Friday night, halacha lamasa, as we pass it in the Shulchan Aruch, you use the challah as you make the kiddush over the challah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Now let's go to the Mishnah Berurah now. Sif Katan Chaf Dalid. Okay, we're here. He's talking about that. Some say you could use sheikhar for kiddush. Okay. So take a look. Chaf Dalid shemikachin al sheikhar. V'dafka b'makom dehave chamar medina. If it's called chamar medina, meaning it needs to be called the wine of the country, right? When it's very commonly consumed, alcoholic beverage. Then you can make kiddush on it. Dahainu she'ein yain matzli b'chol ha'ir. If wine is not found in the whole city, again here, when there's no wine, right? You didn't say after that. When there's no wine in the city, bashana hazo. There's a not for one day, for the whole year there was no wine coming in. V'ikar shtiyasan humi sheichar. So people aren't drinking wine every day with their meal, a little wine. They're drinking sheichar with their meal every day, right? They're drinking beer or sha'ar mashkin or some other alcoholic beverages. Chaf Daled in the Mishnah Berurah. Chaf Daled in the Sifkat on Chaf Daled. You see it there, Jeffrey? You have it? Can you help him there? In Simon Ayin Reish Beis. Thank you for helping him. Anyways, so yeah, that's let's keep going. V'im yesh sham yayin ela shehu b'yoker. What if there is wine, but it's very expensive?
Take out a morning.
He says here, by the way, the Mishnah Berurah is a little more machmir, a little bit here than the Aruch HaShulchan. He says mikre matzui. That's called found here, right? Even though he says it's a little more expensive, so he's less inclined to. Correct. The Aruch HaShulchan is dealing with people who come into him and say, "Rabbi, we can't afford," he says, "Okay, it's fine. You'll take this one." He's in the yeshiva in Radin, and so that's called matzui. V'im yain Yisrael matzui. What if there's not any, kedem wine, a Jewish produced wine? Af al pi sheyein einam Yehudim matzui. You can find a wine that is produced by non-Jews. Lo mikri matzui al yedei. Then that's called not much, because what are you going to drink? Then yes, in the country people drink wine, with their meals. But the Jews are not drinking the wine because it's not kosher. So so Chamar Medina is also a little bit dependent upon what the Jews can drink, right? That's what I think the point he's trying to make here. Chavhei u'shar mashkin, right? The people can make kiddush on sheikhar. Now, what about other beverages? And he says here, v'chalav v'shemen ein bichlal zeh. If you're trying to use milk or oil. Now, I'm not sure that makes oil. Oil straight it seems like a very difficult thing to consume. I don't know that I would even be able to consume a malol lugma of that. Anyways, the ha'enor chama medina. He says that's not called chama medina. I'm sorry. The ein regil nishtosa lamashka. People don't drink that as like what you drink with your meal. You know the way you drink wine with your meal or a little vodka with the meal or what. Now, if you ask me, as a young boy, milk and cookies, milk goes with everything, by the way. I don't know. But he says milk's off the table, oil's off the table. He doesn't end up mentioning tea, I think, yet. I don't think he actually.
Milk would just summarily be off the table unless, of course, you're figuring that most of the time you're gonna have meat. Right. I mean,
Right.
No, but it just seems strange.
Yeah. By the way, even though Hilchot Shabbat said he doesn't think it's called Chamar Medina, because I think it's not. We don't view it as sort of the replacement for the wine. When you don't drink the wine, you drink the milk. It doesn't feel like a Chamar Medina, But here he really puts it off the table. Umash Kosav Chutz Min Hamayim. Remember above in the Shulchan Aruch, he said, yeah, you can something you can make kiddush from sheicha or other kinds of beverages, but not water. What does it mean chutz min hamayim? So he says when it says that rotz lomar, it means to say af im shtiyas kol hamakom hu rak hamayim. That the only thing people drink in this particular locale is water. Afilu hachay ein dino likrosa chamar medina al yedei zeh. You can't call chamar medina. It's water. Water is not chamar medina. Ve'odos yayin saruf. In regards to whiskey, he says ayin lekameh. We're going to talk about that. Okay, so we'll get to that in a moment. Chavav chutz min hamayim ayin lekaman simin reish tavivav sif beis mashra kasav desham Mishnah Berurah. Says they go later the Havdalah simin. What I write there in the Mishnah Berurah. I'll give you the short here. He talks about their borscht. Okay, he says, can you use borscht for Havdalah? That's the question. Is borscht right? Borscht was very commonly consumed. Right? My father, Zichrono Livracha, loved drinking borscht. It was like a treat sometimes because we didn't actually buy it that much because his two boys. I don't actually. I shouldn't speak for my brother. He'll weigh in on this when he listens later. My brother will weigh in because he was listening this year afterwards. You'll let me know what you think about borscht. But I was not a fan.
I wasn't when I was.
Yeah.
But I became. I was my portion.
Oh, really? Okay, there you go. So
it's interesting. But also,
yeah. So borscht was So borscht is something that, like, it was pretty commonly consumed. Borscht was, and so the Mishnah we're talking about borscht, and he says, "Sha'af b'shach hadchak." The Mishnah says, "Ein mevarach alein." This is in the context of Havdalah. He's not using borscht for Havdalah. Mishum she'einam chashuvim. There's no chashivas to borscht. Borscht is like as base as it gets. There's no chashivas to borscht. G'mafal pisha rov b'nei hamadina shosim asan. The Mishnah over there says, even though most people are drinking borscht, but legabe sharmashkim, I'm sorry. That's the period. Even though a lot of people are drinking borscht, there's no chashivas to borscht, and I guess maybe that's also the explanation between milk. Milk is milk. It's not. There's no chashivas to milk. So, anyways, in terms of Havdalah, the Mishnah Berurah says no borscht, and therefore, obviously for kiddush, if you were thinking about using borscht, I'm sorry, you should hold yourself back. Okay.
You know the bilik is borscht. You know that phrase.
Bilik is borscht. What does that mean? There you go. Right, you can't glorify borscht. Right. But it was commonly consumed. People liked it. Anyways, Chaf Zayin, B'chulei, Gam Harosh Sevira Lake Hayesh Omim Harishon. The Rosh Pask is like this first Yesh Omim that says you can use other mashkin, Sheikha and other mashkin. Ella kevan shapas b'letzorach to the Shabbos, but since the bread comes, as part of the needs for the Shabbos meal, choshev tvei, it's actually more choshev to use the challah mishecha lekadosh b'bayil. The reason the Rosh says you should use the challah at night is because the challah is intrinsic to the sort of the status of the meal. Right? We have a lechem mishneh, it's a very important part of the meal. So use that instead of other mashkim. At night, you should be careful not to use any beverages except for wine. Oh, pass, or as a backup, bread if there's no wine in the city. As we said. The harbe gedole harishonim machmir she'eno yotzei bazei de kiddush. Some people say you're not yotzei on these other things at kiddush. So therefore, v'gam mechaber lo echir bazei lahalacha. And the mechaber, even though he didn't say his preference, because all he said was that what the Rush does. He just quoted what the Rush does, and all he says is v'divrei tamhem. He says the Rush makes sense, though he didn't pass. But nonetheless, we should use wine, and as a backup, it's challah. All right, well, let's do one more.
The whole idea with the wine and the class is that it's sharing, the God created the grapes.
Yeah.
Adding with processing, you have a human addition to it, the process that makes it like something holy. That it was particularly that God, you had to, man had to input in some of these things to be made.
Yeah.
A lot of the things you put in change, all this other stuff does require human input.
Right.
Oh, 100%.
Water is nothing.
You're saying like there's no processing of it.
Processing.
Right. Right. Right, but at the day they were doing that, exactly. That's why the milkman had to come every day. That's why the milkman had to come every day. Yeah. Just for those of you who are on Zoom, Bruce was just pointing out that water and even milk, there's no human aspect to the processing of it, unlike by wine or these other beverages, beer, whiskey, etc. And perhaps that's why there's a lack of chashivus. Though that doesn't explain the borscht. I guess borscht just has to be squeezed. Yeah. Anywho, take a look at Chaf Ches al hapas, that you make kiddush on the bread at night, says the Rush. Umaniach liadav alav ad gemar hakiddush. When you do make kiddush over the challah, you put your hand on the challah as you recite the kiddush, as we said. K'moshe kasav siman taf pei gimel. We talked about some weeks back, months back at this one. V'hatam, the k'moshe tzarich lechos biyado hakos shel kiddush. Just like when you have to hold the cup of wine in your hand, kach tzarich lechos apas biyado b'kiddush mekadosh shel apas. Just like that, you're making kiddush over this. You hold it in your hand. Okay, very good. Now,
That's how. He never drank anything in honor of his father.
As the Nazir, which will be very relevant today. Probably won't get to it today, but next week we're going to talk about what happens if you take a neder not to drink wine.
So
yeah.
He never drank wine. So he was like, he was on Friday night. We would make a kiddush, and then afterwards he would do it on the.
Right.
And his wife, helped by our kiddush.
Helped by our kiddush, right. He didn't insist on his chumrah on somebody else. That's very nice. That's very special when people are understanding it. Chaf test tov lekadesh, that in the morning it's actually better to use sheikhar when there's no wine found. He says actually it's better to use that than challah. Why can't I just go to hamotzi and go on with my day? Why dafka on Friday night? On Shabbos day I should use sheikhar to make kiddush when there's no wine available. He says hainu devazeh yohu yoser tova me'alapas. It's better to use sheikhar than to use the bread on Shabbos morning. Why? Kamosha mefarish hatam, as he explained the reasoning. Aval yayin b'makom he didn't explain the reason, but I'll tell you what the reason. Why didn't he say the reason here? There's somewhere else. I'll tell you what the reason is. The reason is because then you don't actually notice anything special. Because if I just say hamotzi, it's just a bracha. It looks like a Tuesday afternoon lunch or a Tuesday night lunch, dinner. If I add a shahakol extra on a drink that I like, it's more clear that because I'm going to make hamotzi in a few minutes afterwards. It's clear that I did this for Shabbos. it actually adds, it lends it's a nod towards my respect towards this meal as something more than just a regular meal.
Rav,
At lunchtime, as you do it.
True, but at least in terms of the words, right? When I make kiddush at night on the challah, it comes with the whole, vayachulu. I had the bracha. I have a mostly, but I also have a shekir shem v'ratzavan v'shabas kacho v'avaras. I have a whole, kivanu v'char. It becomes there's something that makes it stand out. Nothing stands out about the hamotzi that I do in the morning. So he says here that's why. It's better. I guess he's about to explain it maybe. I jumped the gun here. About yain b'makom shumatzah. But if there's wine, here's the Mishnah Berurah's take on this. If there's wine on Shabbos morning available, vada yavarech alav afilu beyom. Even during the day, you should make kiddush over wine. The kedemuchach v'sin reish peites base. B'kol makom b'medina seinu shehayayin biyoker. The wine here where we live in Radin is very expensive. Even though, by the way, earlier he said
again,
expensive wine is considered matzui. But not what he says, that the wine is so expensive here. Virov shtiyas hamedina hu mishar mashkim is from other beverages. Most people are not drinking wine during the week, during the other time. Lo nohagu afilu hagedolim lehader achar yayim hayom. He says, I'm just pointing out the minhag is that even gedolim, we're not searching for wine for Shabbos day. Shakiddush shalohu rak midrabanan l'kuliyalim, because that kiddush is only midrabanan according to everybody. Unlike at night, where it's a deoraisa mitzvah, with somchen atzman al divrei hamakilim bazeh, and they are relying on those who are lenient in this situation that you can use sheikhar. Umishu mevarach gam bayom al hayayin, but if you make kiddush during the day on wine, vaday osa mitzvah min hamufchar, you are doing it the mitzvah in the choicest fashion by using wine. Simeon, what was your question?
it wasn't a question, it was something I wanted to point out.
Yeah.
The Hebrew word that is related to the use of wine is chashivus. It's an elevating beverage. It lends itself to importance. A question is asked, why do we have wine by a bris milah? And the wine provides an element of chashivus at the bris itself.
There's also, yes. I mean, it adds having at a wedding or at a bris. It adds a certain level of chashivus to the mitzvah, 100%. There's no question about that. That is why by certain mitzvahs we add in wine. By Pidyon Haben, we also have a cup of wine. There are other mitzvahs where we will where we want to enhance the mitzvah by putting wine, attaching it to wine, 100%. Now, al hasheichar. Let's just want to finish this topic. So, sorry, I'm going late. Okay, let's just do this. Lamed al sheichar. Okay, that you make in the morning, kiddush on an alcoholic beverage, on beer. B'im chaviv lo yain saruf, and if you happen to love whiskey, yochol lekadesh alav bayom lechatchila b'medina seinu hu shechama medina. Lechatchila, you should make kiddush on this in our countries because that's called chamar medina. People are drinking it to left and right. Ach shizar likach kos machazik revis. You need to get one of those 4-ounce shot glasses for kiddush, okay, or whatever, whatever 3 point something. But I forget the exact number. Maybe 2.9. Maybe I have to go back to my. Yeah, so let's say 2.9. It could be 2.9. I think that numbers come back. It depends. If you hold it b'chazon ish, then you'll be drunk. Okay, then it's probably more like 4. Okay, but the cup shouldn't be the 1 ouncer. That's clear, right? Whether you hold it 2.9 or whatever, right? The cup has to do because you have to make a kiddush on a revis. So he's insisting if you're going to do that, then you need to use a bigger cup and put the right amount of whiskey in there. And then you have to drink a milolugmav, which is the majority of that revis. So 1.5, let's say, ounces.
We don't have the right.
Right.
Because that's part of the other thing too. We open a bottle of wine. If you're not going to drink the whole bottle, right, which mostly, that's why it's more convenient to use whiskey, right?
Yeah.
A bottle, at double the price is still going to last you much longer than a bottle of wine when you open it.
Correct. Now, in a situation where you're not capable of drinking of a whole malol lugma because it's too strong, V'ein lo yayin u'shar mashke, you don't have wine or something else. Afilu shtiyas kol mesud mitzarfin lo lugov. You know what you should do? You make the kiddush on the thing, you start pouring into little shot glasses, and everybody's together. You can get up to a malol lugmav. That's clever. Okay.
They used to have that,
Correct. Instead of the wine thing, you take the whiskey and you pour it, and it could push out the shot glasses for everybody. Then you can even start if everybody's drinking to the malol lugmav. As we talked about before, when it comes to wine, you could do that technically. Reish Ayin Aleph Sif Da'id Daled. That Ula'inyan made Dvash Ushar Mashkin. When it comes to made Dvash Ushar Mashkin, let's say I think here we're talking about mead or some other drink like that. He says, look what we wrote. Look what it says later on in Sivan Reish Tadivav Mishnah in terms of Havdalah using mead and other beverages and how much you have to consume. When we get there, we'll talk about that. But next week, what I will try to even defend the minhag further, because you see, most people make kiddush here, they use a little 1 ouncer. So I will defend that minhag. I personally, as I said, I've laid all my cards on the table. I am pretty happy to make a kiddush on grape juice or wine for Shabbos day as well. But I will defend the minhag of using the 1 ouncer. It comes from a Taz. It's based on a passage, I believe, from the Taz in Hilchos Brachos that changes that, yes, a revius or whatever, because talking about bracha acharona. Because usually you can't make a bracha acharona on liquids unless you drink a revius of it. You have to, but what if it's normal to sort of, you don't consume so much of something like whiskey or whatever, you take a 1 ounce. So the Taz is going to talk about, and maybe actually you already make a bracha acharona on that. In that context, if you're going to say you can make a bracha acharona on it, so some will want to make the connection, say, well, then that means then that can work also for saying that that's enough to make kiddush on it, because for that kind of a drink, that's a level of chashivus, even though it's a small amount. That's how much it would take for you to attain the level of satiation, whatever. So we will discover that Taz next Sunday. All right, we really hopefully covered that topic very thoroughly. And I see your questions.